Geoffrey Chaucer presumably never finished The Cook's Tale, and it breaks off after 58 lines, although some scholars argue that Chaucer deliberately left the tale unfinished. 1. The story starts telling of an apprentice named Perkin, aka Perkin, who is fond of drinking and dancing. Perkin is released by his master and moves in with a friend who also loves to drink, and whose wife is a shopkeeper whose real occupation is that of a prostitute. The tale continues the general downward trend of the preceding tales, the Knights, the Millers and the Reeves tale, into ever more seedy stories. Its length makes finding a source impossible, but it is thought by some scholars to be a retelling of contemporary events, with a Roger Knight de Were being mentioned in several manuscripts of the time. In 25 of the Canterbury Tales MSS, notably Harley MS 7334 in Corpus Christi 198, the Cook's unfinished tale is followed by the anonymous Tale of Gamelin, and it has been suggested that Chaucer intended to rewrite the tale for the Cook. There is, however, no other connection of Gamelin with Chaucer, and the great difference in tone between that tale and the one the Cook starts suggests that it was inserted by the scribes who copied the manuscripts. Skeat argued instead that Chaucer intended the tale for the yeoman, who would presumably be more interested in a tale of country life. The host later calls upon the Cook for another tale, but he is too drunken. After he falls from his horse and is helped back up, the Manciple tells a tale. A renowned chef, Dev Biswal, renamed his Canterbury restaurant from the Umbrette to Cook's Tale, in a tribute to the Chaucerian character. The tasting menu features such medieval delights as Wypocras, fortified Kentish wine served with cake, Wastel Breed with flavored beef drippings, Pyk and Bracy, pigeon with wartas and marybones, salad of sage with chibalis, payson pottage, mushroom bake with fexes, Tamworth cork mortrue, venison with roasted chastains and Walsh notes, and poached pears and cheese. The Cook Roger starts by cog on the Reeves tale and then, after a reference to Solomon, asks for his listeners to attend while he tells of a trick that was played in his city. Lines 1 to 19. The host then invites the Cook to tell his tale. Lines 20 to 40. Summary and analysis: the Cook's prologue and tale. Summary. Roger, the London cook, rejoices in the Reeves tale and thinks that the crooked miller was well repaid for trying to cheat the two students and ridiculing their education. The Cook promises a lively tale, and the host reminds him that he has to tell a very good tale, indeed, to repay the company for all of the bad food he has sold to them. An apprentice cook, named Perkin Reveller, works in London and loves dancing, singing, gambling, carousing, and all types of sinful things. After being dismissed by his master, the young man is free to revel all night and day and joins another young man as corrupt as he is and moves his bed and belongings into his place. The man's wife keeps a shop, which is a front for her immoral activities. Analysis. In the prologue to the Cook's Tale, the host chides the cook for all the seemingly bad food he has sold to them. In reality, though, this tale was to be a tale to repay the earlier narrators. At the end of his prologue, the cook suggests that he will tell a tale about a publican tavern owner but decides to wait until the return trip home. This fits with Chaucer's original plan of having the pilgrims tell stories both on the way to Canterbury and back. This fragment of a tale, which Chaucer neither finished nor deleted, is not long enough for one to predict accurately what happens to young Perkin Reveller, but the indications are that he falls rapidly into sin. The early implications are that this unfinished tale was to be of the same general type as the Millers and the Reeves and was apparently to have dealt with the total perversion of the human soul. To say more would be pure conjecture. Glossary. Solomon, the Book of Solomon X, 25 in the Apocrypha. Jack of Dover, possibly a reference to a meat pie. Chepe today, London's Cheapside. In Chaucer's time, it was a favorite scene of festivals and processions. With revel to Newgate, in Chaucer's time, when a man was taken to prison, he was most often preceded by revellers and minstrels so as to call public attention to his disgrace. Until the 19th century, Newgate was the most prominent debtors' prison in the world. The Canterbury Tales summary and analysis of the Cook's Tale. The Cook's Prologue. Roger of Ware, the cook, claps the reeve on the back, for joy. Delighted with the way Simpkin the miller had received his comeuppance in the tale, the cook then promises a tale of his own, despite the fact that he is only a pauvre man, a poor man. The host answers, granting Roger the next tale. But he adds, look that it be good, and comments on Roger's tendency to draw the gravy out of unsold pies, and resell pies that have already been reheated twice in his shop, full of flies. The host's conclusion incites Roger the cook to tell a story, in game, in jest, in fun. Roger agrees, and, reminding Harry Bailly, the host, not to be angry, particularly because his tale is about a hostler, pub owner, like the host himself, he begins his tale. The Cook's Tale. Once an apprentice lived in our city, perhaps, where, in Hertfordshire the town the cook is from, and his craft was selling food. He was a short man, with a dark complexion and black hair, and he was an excellent dancer, so good, that people called him Perkin Reveller. To revel is to dance and have a good time. He loved the tavern better than his shop, and, whenever there was a procession in Cheapside, he would run out of the shop to enjoy himself and dance, forgetting about work. He often stole from his master, with whom he lived until he had finished his apprenticeship. However, one day, his master sent for him, and quoting the proverb, "It is better to take the rotten apple out of the bag than to have it rot all the other apples," decided to get rid of him. Now this jolly apprentice had his leave, and could riot all night if he so pleased, and eventually, he found board with a companion of his own sort, who loved dice, and revelling, and pleasure. This companion had a wife who, for the sake of appearances only, kept a shop and had sex for a living. Thus abruptly ends the Cook's Tale. Analysis. Thus ends the first fragment of the Canterbury Tales, with a tale that breaks off before it has really gets anywhere, and the real question is whether the tale is deliberately left unfinished by Chaucer, whether he intended to return to it, or whether we have just lost some of the manuscript. There are no definite answers, unfortunately, and critics have argued for all three positions. That said, there are a few interesting things about the tale as we have it. Firstly, Roger of Ware seems to have been a real person who lived at the same time as Chaucer. This lends a whole new aspect to the Canterbury Tales, if we consider that Chaucer might have populated his pilgrimage with real people, whom his audience might have recognized. The whole question, raised already in other tales, of reality versus fiction, takes on a deeper level when we consider that Chaucer is not the only pilgrim to have a dual existence in the real world and within the fictional one. Might this tale be in some way a parody or a joke at the real Roger's expense? It's very possible, but impossible to prove. Seth Lear has persuasively argued that, like many other of Chaucer's works, including The House of Fame and The Legend of Good Women, there is a very real possibility that the Cook's Tale might have been left deliberately unfinished. It is, Professor Lear argues, a tale which breaks off just at the point where we understand what sort of tale it is to be, a grim, gritty tale about a prostitute and a drunken, good-for-nothing apprentice. The trajectory from the formal, fictionalized, stylish romance of The Knight's Tale, down through the fabliau of the miller and reeve, hits rock bottom with a realistic tale about a real cook and animal copulation in exchange for money. We don't hear the Cook's Tale told, but we know all too well what sort of thing is to come next, and so language disintegrates completely at the end of the first fragment. Formal language was replaced by bodily noises in the miller's tale, language was replaced by action in the reeve's tale, and now language stops altogether. The whole project of the tales comes to a dead standstill.